So it's 1 year this week since Bola Tinubu was sworn in as Nigeria's president. But ask any Nigerian and they'll tell you it doesn't feel historic. Instead, the chill is everywhere. And that chill suggests for many that they promised vestiges of hope, renewed hope to be precise, have not materialized, so far at least. It's a view that's been given strong support by the opposition, and one that can't have been a surprise to the APC government, which can clearly see what is going on and can gauge the mood across Nigeria. And that rather downbeat mood is fueled by the harsh economic winds that have been hitting Nigeria particularly hard, with inflation, rising food and transportation prices, and the falling value of the naira uppermost on the minds of many. So inflation is going up, but wages are not keeping up. The question is, how much of that is the direct result of the policies of President Tinubu, and how much is due to the austere economic circumstances that have been hitting the rest of the world? Well, for more on this, I'm joined now in the studio by the Special Advisor to the President on Economic Affairs, Tope Fasua. Thank you very much indeed for coming in.
Thank you for inviting me.
You're a busy man. We've been trying to get you for a while.
Well, you know, it comes with the terrain.
I guess it does. Yes. But let's make an obvious start with the economy. It's not looking too good right now, is it?
Well, it's a temporary thing. And I personally believe we'll turn the corner pretty soon. And it's what happens. I actually use the analogy of a farmer. There's a time to plant. There's a time to watch it grow. There's a time to care for the plant, to weed it and all of that. And there's a time to harvest. So the government is in now for 1 year, and it's the planting season. And the government, well, when I try to think about the personality of President Tinubu, what he stands for, the kind of things he does, I put it down to one word, decisiveness. So President Tinubu is someone who likes to do big things, you know, and if you look at the kind of reforms that we have actually had in place in the last 1 year, they are big reforms. So on day one, May 29, he didn't even ask for anybody's cue. He said, look, I was possessed by this, you know, gung-ho spirit to move on. And he said, you know what, subsidy is over. Now, I always quickly like to tell people, this is a government of accountants and auditors. I'm also one, you know, and we have bankers, accountants, auditors. It's the way they think. And so the whole idea is, look, let's balance the accounts. Why are we hemorrhaging money in terms of fuel subsidies? You know, and I mean, the international community has been on our necks, you know, the development partners for too long about fuel subsidies. And we tried in the past. It didn't quite work in the Jonathan era, in the Buhari era. So he wanted to say, look, let's start on a clean slate. And however, not long after that, we also had this attempt to unify the rates, you know, the naira exchange rate with the dollar, which is a lot more tricky. That was a lot more tricky, and sometimes it tends to undo the, you know, the fuel price deregulation. But you know, those are the two reforms that are very prominent, which we're working. In fact, I'll probably let you know that, look, in terms of the unification of the dollar, the official and the parallel rate, that has now been achieved. Even though I see that also because the central bank governor did say at some point that, look, I believe that he said he believes that the naira is undervalued. And that was when naira was trading at even about 1,100, 1,200. And, you know, it gave us an idea that based on the central bank model, perhaps we're looking at 700, 800 at some point. Now, you don't achieve some of these things very quickly. So that's one. You know, but I also want to point out that there's a very critical reform that was taken by the government of the day, our government, which hardly gets talked about. And there are, of course, other reforms. But the one I want to emphasize is the treatment of the Ways and Means. The Ways and Means, we discovered about 30 trillion had been spent. I put it down somewhat to a certain kind of inexperience in the economic response to global cataclysms. For example, COVID-19 came in 2020. Most economies didn't wake up until late 2021. And almost every economy in the world actually did almost exactly what Nigeria did. Sans some of the, I'll give it, you know, maybe a lot of corruption came in, you know. But 30 trillion was found to have been spent. Because when I look at how much, when I did my calc of what Nigeria spent around the COVID, it goes between $40 billion to $50 billion. And these, most of these were basically issued as cash, from the central bank of the day. However, the new government has come to say, you know what, we're never going to do that anymore. We want to keep a clean slate. If we're going to raise money from the public, we would make sure it goes through all the approvals and all of that. Now, how many countries actually try to resolve such an expense within 1 year, bring it back on balance sheet as part of the national debt, because I actually did trace it in the UK, £500 billion was spent on COVID, and most of that money was bought by the Bank of England to warehouse, and meaning that it's still in the balance sheet of Bank of England. In the US Fed actually spent $6 trillion on COVID, so because we hadn't had experience of a World War I, World War II, all of the experience that Europe has had, Bosnia-Herzegovina, all those kind of things that cause serious displacement. Nigerians will say, oh, we fought a civil war in 67 to 70, we didn't spend a dime. But you don't expect that. You would always do that. Okay, because for me, and lastly, I'll just say this, for me, as far as I'm concerned, COVID was our own war time in our generation. The generation before us went for the for the Civil War. The one before them was in the Second World War. The one before that was in the First World War. There's always something that shakes you up in every generation. Okay. So our response to that was bold. And lastly, to say, sir, that there are other small reforms. For example, talk about the credit scheme that the government is putting in. That's a major reform. The one about skill acquisition.
You can't say everything at once.
Are reforms as well.
I appreciate that. Yeah. I mean, you've said a lot. And maybe we're not as smart as you are. So we need to break them into bite-sized chunks. You see what I mean? So we want to take them one by one. Okay. If you look at the inflation figures, it seems to be in quite a bad shape. Nobody can deny that. If you look at the headline inflation rate, it's at a record high of nearly 34%. And the removal...
Not quite record high, maybe 28-year high, actually.
Well, it's a record high. I mean, it's never been that high.
We've had worse scenario.
Anyway, the removal or partial removal of the fuel subsidy that you were talking about has dramatically increased transportation costs and had a major impact on food inflation. Let's take that just by itself, the inflation rate. It is going up in spite of all the measures that the central bank is putting in. It's been going up steadily. For the, if you like, I mean, arguably for the last, since the last government, into your government, and just continuing. It's galloping.
Yes, we sort of understand. It stopped galloping because if you look at the last numbers that were released, we were talking about month-on-month addition. It's slow. It's going up at a slower rate. So therefore, it's no longer galloping. I wanted to come against to clarify that. But again, yes, like you said, no, it is not quite the highest we've had. We've had some very serious economic crises back 30 years ago, which shot things up to 60% inflation in this country, 70% inflation in this country. We're trying never to get to that point again, and never to get to what countries like Egypt, like Turkey, and Ghana have been through, because it's unnecessary. Because we know we can understand.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but the point here is that inflation has been steadily rising under your government.
Thus far, but
irrespective of it doesn't matter what happened in the past or what happened in Ghana.
I'll also say this, Mr. Charles, that look,
I mean, it's going up. You're going to see, and your measures are not bringing it down.
I'll probably predict to you that by the end of this month, you begin to see that number trending down. And at some point in time, the inflation will drop like a rock. And the reason why I say that is this, the phenomenon of inflation itself, at some point when prices get to a certain point, and you can't increase anymore, that's 0% inflation, so you can't go up anymore. So the assumption, however, we also understand the kind of animal we're dealing with, because the inflation we're dealing with is not such that the central bank alone can solve. So there's an issue about, okay, can you continue to increase interest rates until we get the cue? Because according to the theory of inflation, the best way to tackle inflation is by increasing interest rates.
Yeah, but that theory doesn't seem to be working in
Nigeria, it's not quite. And even the central bank has actually owned up to that fact that, listen, we're going to need some help. So you look at the other side of the equation. The chief driver of our inflation is food inflation. What's happening in that space? So what's the response from the agric sector? You know, the agric minister is expanding. You know, we have about 130,000 hectares of new hectares of dry season farming in 15 states that have been cultivated already to push that food out. But you know, we got a problem. Nigeria is surrounded by francophone countries on all sides, and the sea and the Atlantic Ocean. And, you know, these countries, we also are postured as the giant of Africa with a lot of excess to give to other countries. So right now, especially with where the Naira is, they are getting our food for cheap. And a lot of that is not documented. If they were documented, perhaps they would have added to our GDP growth. And I believe we probably have a discussion about the GDP later on. If they were documented, you would have added to our GDP growth, and that would have counted for us. But where you understand that, you know, a lot of the borders are artificial, and, you know, you're here in some parts of Niger into Nigeria, there's only one small gutter that demarcates it. On both sides are family members who worship together, speak same language. So why would you not imagine the amount of commerce that goes on there? So we understand that, look, we need to do something about food inflation. First of all, we need to get our data right. We need to be able to track the food production that goes out of this country.
What are you advising? I mean, you talked about the fact that the central bank governor has admitted that raising interest rates isn't bringing inflation down. No. Because it doesn't seem to work in the Nigerian context.
He did not admit to that effect. Even though, so what has happened, you know, in the
monetary policy, what advice are you giving them about how to bring inflation down? I mean, you're the special advisor on economic affairs.
You know, I try my best, you know, but the point is that, you know, it's clear, I've written about this, whether internally, even externally, to say, you know what, the kind of inflation we're dealing with will not only be solved by interest rate hikes. And luckily, I can remember one of the, you know, every member of the MPC, Monetary Policy Committee, they do their own write-up. Philip Picasso, I remember very clearly about 2 meetings ago, did write to that effect that it's looking like this is not quite a, you know...
So what would you advise them
a demand side kind of inflation, given that, you know, we're not assuming that people have so much money. You know, they're the monetarists as well, the monetary economists who always want to talk about money supply, money supply. I'm not one of those, because I think our economy is a lot more basic than some of the things that Milton Friedman said in his time.
Absolutely.
And so basically it's about, you know what I'm advising is this, you know what, if food inflation is driving at 40.53%, that's scandalous anyway, but we can actually begin to really tackle that. I support the Minister of Agric going after where is my food coming from? Who's taking my food abroad without documentation? What is happening with our food export? If we can block that, there's going to be a lot more food immediately. If you can block that, if you don't even want to block it and say, okay, you know what, people in Sudan want Nigerian food. People in Niger, in Chad, in Mauritania, they want Nigerian food. Some of the food eaten in all of those regions come from Nigeria. We've got the land. You know, and the north of Nigeria is actually extremely fertile area. You know, you don't need a lot of forests to be able to produce food, some kind of food, the grains as well. I've been to some of the markets in this country, the biggest markets for grains in West Africa, Dawano market in Kano, Gujungu market in Jigawa State. You know, we've been to some of those places, understanding what's going on and all. So if we could tackle inflation and slow down food inflation, especially, you'll see inflation come crashing down. Number two is that we also look at a lot of the inflation that's going on in Nigeria is actually a lot of price gouging. And I did my research also to find out that in the US, every state has a consumer protection law that outlaws anyone increasing prices by 15 to 20% or more in any time of emergency, which I believe we're in an emergency here. Only a few states, maybe South Carolina, a couple of them don't have that law in the United States. Well, in the United Kingdom, the CMA, the competitions and market or whatever agency, they always go after this. You know, because you can't just. And what we're seeing in Nigeria, someone wakes up and say, you know what, I don't like the face of the president. I'm going to give him some problems. And so the guy increases the price by 30%, by 50%. This is a good time. It's a great time for Nigeria to actually begin to put structures in place, not only for now, for the future, for people to know their limits, and for us to begin to tend towards where other countries are.
Let's keep in mind that your APC government, I mean, it may be the Tinubu government, but you've been in power now, the APC, for 9 years. So we're not talking about an isolated incident where you just came in a year ago. There's been a continuous APC government for 9 years, and you haven't achieved the things that you're talking about. Let's look at the cost of the fuel subsidy. And everybody agrees with you that it needed to be removed. It was something like $10 billion in 2022-23. That's more than the education and health spending combined. So that was clearly unsustainable. But where the problem lies, and I'm sure you're aware of this, is in the administration's apparent inability to mitigate the impact. Is it a lack of planning or a lack of funds?
Well, okay, there are a couple of things involved in what you asked, you know, the fuel subsidy situation. You know, one of the things that actually gives problem, like I said earlier, is, you see, people will probably cope with fuel subsidy removal and the attendant, you know, increase in price of fuel and the attendant inflation that it pushes up. However, when the Naira begins to play on that, okay, you know, serious devaluation of the Naira, depreciation of the Naira, that's when you have a problem. They tend to work like a yo-yo. This goes up, the other one comes up, and say, look, this has come up, I need to go up again. There's a point at which Nigeria, the president had to stamp his feet, you know what, on that fuel price, we're not going to be going up. I mean, there was a time, I think was the IMF or World Bank, where he had to say, you know what, you guys have to increase fuel price to $7.50. That's about 6 months ago. And, you know, it was just wasn't possible because the president is not here to make people suffer. You know, that's that. So, you know, so basically there's still a lot of management going on in that space in terms of the fuel subsidy, what have you, you know.
Yeah, but you haven't done anything to mitigate.
In terms of the mitigation, I mean, that's the problem people have. There's an issue there. Okay, so there's still the discussion going on. And 2 days ago, I understand that the minister, coordinating minister of the economy did say that we're going back to the cash disbursement. Yeah,
but you removed the subsidy.
Yeah.
And then started the discussion. You see what I mean? You're saying the discussion is going on.
It's a negotiation.
I mean, why wasn't the discussion taking place before you removed it?
No. Exactly back to the question. What kind of president do we have? I told you, I said, you know what, whether we like it or not, this is a government of accountants, auditor. The gentleman is an auditor, he's an accountant. So, yeah, but you can't, from day one, the idea was, you know what, we need to know.
Yeah, but you can't use that as an excuse to somebody, a woman who with her children who are starving. I mean, you can't go to them and say the president is an accountant or he's this.
When you talk about that,
I mean, you
can use that as part of the explanation because we're talking about accountability here. So, you know, if we want to run Nigeria as maybe like a big charity, there's an argument for that as well, to say, you know, let everybody just enjoy whatever. Let's enjoy everything and never get to take the hard decision. So I'm just reading the mind of the president to say what he tried to do in the beginning was to say, you know what, let us take the hard decision. The contention, I believe what you're saying now, is the speed with which it was the palliatives were rolled out. And the palliatives were also around the corner.
I mean, very few people are
exactly. At some point, there was an issue with the palliative, which has now been repackaged. But the issue then becomes this. What are we really supposed to just be giving our cash helicopter money in the country? Is that the best way? I'll probably prefer, which I'd written about as well, that we probably use whatever money that would have spent as cash to people, which is also inflationary in nature.
Nobody is saying you should give cash to people. To improve your public transport.
To reboot, of course, part of the public transport, our agri sector, a lot of intervention for the youth. Well, I have one great idea, which I've always been pushing.
Done that.
For example,
you've been talking about it, but we haven't seen.
So let me say this. Let me also say this. Like I said earlier, apart from the two big policies that people are aware of, which are the policies that are, you know, very big policies indeed, in the oil sector policy and Naira policy, there are also a raft of other policies that this government has
policies
put in place.
are things
and
you write on a piece of paper.
It is
the implementation of those policies.
Yes, when you implement policies, you also have to give room for review of policies, for evaluation of policies as well. Say, you know what, are we going in the right direction? And of course, even the response we get and the feedback we get from the public is also very, very important to the success of the policy.
Mr. Fasua, let me just say this. Okay, I mean, I've heard you and your colleagues in the finance, planning, economy ministries saying they appreciate that the economy is pretty tough,
right,
and prices are rising, but suggesting that it is a difficult global context. You mentioned that as well here. But let me ask you this as a former opposition presidential candidate. You ran for president, and a former independent economist.
Right.
Is there a balance between what's being imposed from outside and responsibility for decisions taken by President Tinubu and his ministers?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I mentioned one to you earlier about when they asked us to increase fuel price a lot earlier, and there was local resistance. Even the concept of conditional cash transfers had been resisted to a certain extent, you know, by this government to say, you know what, we need to probably look at internally and ask ourselves what's going on here and how can we best respond to our people. Remember that a number of these things, of course, like you said, I remember that a month after this government came in, and in the middle of that attempt to unify the rate, there was a report by JP, no less than JP Morgan, which is also a banker anyway, unfortunately. You know, they brought a report and said Nigeria had only $2 billion left in reserves. And what they did was basically to net off our long-term liabilities off of our cash. And who does that? I mean, if you got a mortgage of 30 years mortgage for £300,000 or more, you know, and someone comes to you and says, you know what, you got 2,000 quid in your account, and therefore, you know, you should probably declare bankruptcy. That didn't work. And they said we didn't have more than 2 months of import cover. But this is 12 months after, and we're still standing.
No,
we have
but everybody,
no
I mean, everybody agrees
that
your revenue in that respect has gone up.
No, it's not just revenue. It's about revenue. It's about revenue. It's about management of treasury management. Okay, but you understand? And also, it's about the perception that people give out of Nigeria. Of course, a lot of Nigerians jumped on that band. Oh, Nigeria is dead. Nigeria is
well, let me ask you this, because we're running out of time.
Yes.
And you've said a lot of things, a lot of very interesting things. Obviously, you talked about the devaluation of the naira. It's gone down by up to 60% in the past year.
But it's back again up to 1,173.
Obviously pushed up import costs in a country as import dependent as Nigeria.
Well, we're also trying not to be that import dependent. That's one of the ideas.
And it's also increased inflation. But you mentioned, in terms of the benefit of all this, you mentioned that foreign investors asked for these measures to be implemented.
Yes, some of them.
But they are not flocking to Nigeria, are they? I mean, they seem to be waiting to see the impact and the success of these measures before investing. So no big rush of investors, and Nigerians could be waiting a long time before they show up, couldn't they, if they show up?
I probably won't. I'm not one of those who set so much store on foreign investment. I also, because I'm an economist. Fundamentally, before I became an accountant.
I mean, you're an international economist.
And you know, well, thank you for that. But basically to say that, you know, there's also domestic investment to encourage. Nigerians have money. If Nigerians are taking their monies abroad, and then you're telling people from abroad to bring their money here, they know you're kidding. So to a large extent, there's the, you know, we have to have a much more eclectic view of the kind of ways that we can reboot our economy. We have to encourage the locals. We have to do mass mobilization of the youth.
Yeah, but are you doing that?
And yes, that has started. Go to National Orientation Agency.
To do it.
Yes, National Orientation Agency, they're doing a lot to wake the youth up. There's the Minister of Youth. There's a youth bank coming. A bank for youth, apart from a youth investment fund. There's the infrastructure fund as well. Right. You know, several billion, it starts with 20 trillion or thereabout, you know. So there's a lot of reforms going on, and I believe that, whereas I also would say that Nigerians should continue to be vigilant, point us to, but we also, part of what we need to do is to look for those who would want to sabotage the country, you know, for political reasons and take advantage of our people.
Well, talking about sabotage,
not work.
Let me ask you this, because we're running out of time. beyond the economic side, we also know that for the economy to properly take off, you have to sort out the security situation.
Yes.
It's not been a great story so far. And obviously, when there's insecurity, that impedes foreign investment because investors will be worried about the security of their facilities. Farmers can't go to the farms and field their crops and produce the harvest.
It's a lot better, sir. So look at it from a geopolitical angle. In the Northeast, we're not hearing much about Boko Haram anymore, thankfully. Thankfully. I don't know when last you heard that they threw a bomb or whatever. So that's, in the Northwest, it's reduced, but for some parts of Zamfara State, even Sokoto State seems to be clear now. So remember, this is a journey, not a destination. There's no country with 100% security, fixed. I mean, go to South Africa.
Yeah, but I don't think you should be talking about 100%.
Sometimes you can't do 100%. We're not 100% yet. So I've given you two regions. In the Southwest, there used to be a whole lot of kidnapping going on at some point. In the Southeast, even except for today, where I hear 4 soldiers were killed, people had started going out on Mondays, and it looked like these guys are getting tired. So whatever the security guys are doing between the security advisor and the military chiefs and the police chief, it seemed to be working. So I think at some point the security, ground zero moved to somewhere around Jos and Benue. And I personally, I follow the pattern. So I realized that, okay, they're around Jos and Benue, what's going on? Because usually behind some of these things are sometimes political leaders, sometimes, tribal leaders who just want to form it. Sometimes about money. It's about money. Yeah, people just say, look, let's give this government some problems because we get paid. So I think that the security situation under Tinubu government is better than what we had under Jonathan, under Buhari. And we're hoping that it continues to be that way. Okay. Minding the fact that everywhere there's problem. The UK, they have all those knife crimes. In the US, 30,000 people get killed every year. Of gun crime. Okay. 30,000 people. And in Nigeria, they released a number, a couple of days, 4,000 people have been killed in 12 months, which is bad enough. But we believe that next year it's going to be a lot less as we, try to take care of our society.
Well, I want to thank you very much indeed. And I want to thank you for keeping your word, because you did promise that you would come on this program at some point. It took a while, but you did get here.
Yeah, exactly. It took quite a while, yes. Thank you.
In the end. Thank you very much indeed. And really good to have you here. Tope Fasua is the special advisor to the President on Economic Affairs. Thank you ever so much.